The Stoneman is a name given by the popular English-language print media of Calcutta, India to an unidentified serial killer who murdered at least 13 homeless people of that city during their sleep in 1989. The name is also given to the perpetrator of a similar series of murders in Bombay from 1985 to 1988. It has been speculated that these were the work of the same person, who could have been responsible for as many as 26 murders. The first hint of a serial killer who was targeting homeless ragpickers and beggars in India came from Bombay. Starting in 1985, and lasting well over 2 years, a series of 12 murders were committed. The criminals' modus operandi was simple. First, they would find an unsuspecting victim sleeping alone in a desolate area. The victim's head was crushed with a single stone weighing as much as 30 kilograms. In most cases, the victims' identities could not be ascertained since they slept alone and did not have relatives or associates who could identify them. Compounded to this was the fact that the victims were people of very simple means and the individual crimes were not high profile. Whether or not the Bombay killings were linked to the Calcutta Stoneman killings has never been confirmed. However, the uncanny similarity in the instrument, choice of victims, execution, and the time of the attack suggests the assailants was familiar with the Bombay episodes, if not the same killer himself.
Between 1972 and 1974, the bodies of 5 young black and Puerto Rican boys were discovered in Manhattan, New York. Another boy was assaulted and left for dead. The victims were stabbed or slashed, and their genitals were mutilated and, in most cases, removed entirely. This assailant is also known to have attempted to murder one other child. In March of 1972, 8-year-old Douglas Owens was found dead, stabbed 38 times. His penis had been cut but not severed from his body. On April 20th, another black youth was repeatedly stabbed. His genitals were severed from his body, although he survived his injuries. On October 23rd, 9-year-old Wendell Hubbard was stabbed to death on the roof of an East Harlem tenement block. His penis had also been severed from his body. The following March 7th, a 9-year-old Puerto Rican child named Luis Ortiz was stabbed 38 times and likewise mutilated. After the murder of Luis Ortiz, the local community was in an uproar. Public meetings were held, the sketch was distributed all over. And a local class even made a video warning other children to stay away from strangers. Schizophrenic Ernesto Soto confessed to killing another boy, originally suspected to be part of the murders, but could not be convicted for the other killings, and thus the two are kept separate.
Between 1935 and 1938, a serial killer murdered and dismembered at least 12 victims, only 2 of which were ever positively identified. The torso murderer always beheaded and often dismembered his victims, occasionally severing the victim's torso in half or severing their appendages. In most cases, the cause of death was decapitation or dismemberment itself. Some of the bodies were found with their dismembered limbs near each other, and others took days to piece together, like a morbid jigsaw puzzle. Some of the body parts were never located. Some investigators, including lead Cleveland detective Peter Merillo, believe that there may have been 13 or more victims in the Cleveland, Youngstown, and Pittsburgh areas between the 1920s and 1950s. Most of the male victims were castrated, and some victims showed evidence of chemical treatment being applied to their bodies. Many of the victims were found after a considerable period of time following their deaths, occasionally in excess of a year. Despite an investigation of the murders, which at one time was led by famed lawman and Cleveland's then public safety director Elliot Ness, the murderer was never apprehended.
In 1986, park rangers near Virginia's Colonial Parkway get notified of a possible traffic accident. When rangers arrive, they are confronted with the violent scene. The deaths of Kathleen Thomas and Rebecca Dowski. An autopsy found rope burns on their necks and wrists, signs of strangulation, their throats had been slashed, and diesel fuel was poured over the bodies and the car but apparently failed to ignite. Media didn't take notice until a second couple was murdered, David Knobling and Robin Edwards, who were both shot in the back of the head. A third couple, Cassandra Haley and Richard Call, went missing with only an abandoned car found. Both are presumed dead. A fourth couple, Anna Maria Phelps and Daniel Lauer, were found on October 19, 1989. Hunters had come across a blanket in the woods, and when they moved them they found two skeletons. At least one of the badly decomposed bodies appears to have suffered knife wounds, with definitive scoring on the bones of Anna Maria. None of the victims had any evidence of sexual assault, and all their vehicles were left on the side of the road. Investigator Steve Spingola suggested there were multiple killers, and a couple homicide in 1996 could be attributed to the killers. Regardless, the killer was never found.
During the mid-1980s, a suspected serial killer murdered at least 6 women along the New Hampshire/Vermont border. It is believed that he also attacked a pregnant woman named Jane Borowski, but she miraculously survived, despite being stabbed 27 times. He attacked all of the women in the Connecticut River Valley near Route 91 in both Vermont and New Hampshire. Criminal psychologist John Philpin attempted to develop a profile of the killer. He made several trips to the area where Bernice and Ellen's bodies were found, hoping to get a better understanding of the killer's mindset at the time of the murders. He believes that the killer pre-selects sites to take his victims to in order to frighten them before killing them. John also interviewed Jane and put her under hypnosis. She described to him, in detail, the brutal attack. She remembered that the attacker seemed extremely calm and collected. She also recalled that when she stopped struggling with him, he seemed to lose interest and stop attacking her. Police have attempted to match multiple individuals to the killings, but so far nothing came from the leads. The closest, Gary Westover, died after a confession that he murdered one of the victims, so it's unknown if he was actually responsible.
The Danilovsky maniac is an unidentified Russian serial killer who is suspected of committing at least 7 murders between 2004 and 2007 in the city of Cherepovets, Vologda Oblast. This unidentified serial killer gained their name after 3 of the 7+ murders were committed on an abandoned construction site on Danilovsky Street. At the crime scenes, the killer had a tendency to leave photos of pornographic characters on the walls. The killer seemed to be sexually motivated, as most of his victims were raped before their death/disappearance, and there are no reports of anything missing from the victims. So this rules out a product killer. It seems like it is highly possible that he is involved with the murders from 1993 to 2003 due to the lack of evidence and witnesses he leaves behind in his later crimes. Also, most of his crimes seem planned out apart from the victims, who may be just victims of circumstance and opportunity. One thing is for certain is that the maniac seems to fall into the organized category of serial killers. He doesn't mutilate his victims, and he is able to control his urge to rape and murder for sustained periods of time.
Between 2005 and 2007, an unknown individual targeted women along the eastern Florida coast. Police were able to learn much about this serial killer from the evidence left behind at the crime scenes, but have yet to identify them. The killer has targeted women with drug problems and possible involvement in the sex trade. It is known that the offender used the same handgun in the first 3 murders. Furthermore, police have his DNA on file. Law enforcement believe the women were all to varying degrees involved in prostitution. What doesn't seem to be a matter of debate, however, is the fact that the victims have a drug dependence. The murdered women were known to frequent bars and establishments along Ridgewood Avenue in downtown Daytona Beach. Also, 2 of the women have links to a bar, called Willie's Place. 2 others have known links to a nearby homeless center. These locations are all within walking distance of each other. We don't know if the women were shot whilst they were standing or if police suspect the murderer had the victims kneel. Like an execution-style killing. Equally, we don't know the range from which the women were shot or if the bodies were posed after the murder.
This killer committed 3 murders in a span of 2 months, which is especially brazen for a serial killer. The strangler is also supposedly responsible for the 1898 murder of clairvoyant Julia Vaught and 1903 murder of Mabel Brown, but this remains only speculation. All victims were sex workers, all leaving back doors unlocked, all working the same street within blocks of each other, but wildly differing in age and race. The chief of police, within a day of the 3rd murder, put out to the press that he believed such a criminal exists in this city as Jack the Ripper, as reported in the Trenton Times on November 14, 1894. In an era of policing long before the days of understanding serialized sexual murder, this is a very perplexing addition to the case that potentially saved it from completely fading into obscurity. The list of suspects was massive, and many went to trial, but were acquitted. Suspects included individuals like Richard Demandy, a landlord and partner to one of the murder victims, and Alphonse Lemery, a French sailor reported to have said the night of Connaissance's murder, "There is between $800 and $900 in that house. I believe, and I will kill her to get that money." Most victims were choked to death, hence the name.